Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 1st of February 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. So, Mike, pinch and a punch on the 1st of the month.
Really?
Probably that's been outlawed by now. So
No, children are still doing it these
are they?
days. Yeah,
well, I think we can put a stop to that pretty quickly because that would be outrageous, as we'll see as we get into the news.
Okay. We're going to start off with day 2 of Theresa in China, and she's apparently has met President Xi this morning. But she gave a speech yesterday where she kind of gives us a clue as to what's really in her mind. During the speech, she said, "We welcome the opportunities provided by the Belt and Road Initiative to further prosperity and sustainable development across Asia and the world. And as with the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, the UK is a natural partner for the Belt and Road Initiative with our unrivaled expertise. As I've discussed with Premier Li, we discussed how the UK and China can continue to work together to identify how best we can cooperate on the Belt and Road Initiative across the region and ensure it meets international standards." So it doesn't matter that the Belt and Road is bringing lots of people out of poverty and developing countries that Britain and its financial elites have kept in abject poverty for decades, if not centuries. We have to make sure that the Belt and Road meets international standards. We'll work together, she said, to encourage free and fair trade, ensure a transparent, rules-based, multilateral trading system, and build an open global economy that works for all. So that was her message to the Chinese. You will conform with international norms.
You will. I was a bit worried about that picture, Mike, because I thought initially that was the EU logo pinned in the centre of that building, but I realise that can't possibly be true.
Indeed.
So we're lecturing the Chinese on how to do things properly, how to build stuff properly. Right, okay.
Yep.
Well, it was a good job that the Prime Minister was in China because behind her back, George Osborne has apparently been saying this. This is taken from The Guardian. George Osborne is on record as saying that after the general election, Theresa May was a dead woman walking, and he was joking about wanting her chopped up in bags in his freezer.
Because that's the sort of thing you joke about all the time, isn't it, Brian?
Well, I think if you joked about it, or I joked about it, Mike, I think we'd have a little visit from Devon and Cornwall Police for some sort of hate speech. But apparently this MP, of course, who is Snow White in many, many ways, he can say that he would like to chop up the Prime Minister in bags and nobody's going to go near him. Dangerous individual, I think. But this is what he'd really been up to. He's now been saying to the Tories, well, you don't have to go along with this. You can always go for a soft Brexit. I don't know how much softer than Brexit without the exit you can go, but presumably that's pretty soft.
Well, absolutely. Yesterday, the Foreign Secretary from Ireland was meeting the Foreign Secretary from Britain in London. So that's Simon Coveney on the right-hand side there. Discussing the importance, apparently, of maintaining regular engagement through and beyond the UK's exit from the EU, which, of course, Brian, you and I know isn't going to happen. And apparently they're going to recognise that the unique UK-Ireland relationship is epitomised by our historic ties, family bonds and people-to-people links. Yes, right. So we'll move swiftly on because Liam Fox has said that post-Brexit trade deals are some time away. So the question is, what is Boris Johnson talking about? Well, he's worried about what's going on in Ireland. Liam Fox worried about trade deals which aren't going to happen for some time. He said we haven't got a Brexit yet, of course, and that may be some time away if we've got an implementation period. But what we're doing is to ensure that when we have economic freedoms, we can take advantage of them. Well, are we going to have economic freedoms? Are we going to have a Brexit? We get a bit of a clue perhaps from this document. This is the EU's transition rules document, which they released a couple of days ago. And so I'm just going to run through some of the key points in this document. They say that this, for example, the European Council also made clear that negotiations in the second phase, this is the transition phase, the second phase of negotiations, could only progress so long as all commitments undertaken during the first phase were respected in full and translated faithfully in legal terms as quickly as possible. So EU making it clear that there's no way that Britain can pull back on any of the commitments it's made in the first phase. And we've got to get all this EU legislation onto the statute books as quickly as possible. They go on to say, during the second phase of the negotiations, in view of the unique circumstances and specific nature of issues related to the island of Ireland, the work on detailed arrangements required to give effect to the principles and commitments set out in the joint report should continue in a distinct strand. So they're going to separate the Irish question out into a separate negotiation strand. And clearly, Boris Johnson and Simon Coveney talking about this yesterday, but that's going to be a separate negotiation strand because, of course, this is a pretty significant issue. It brings us down to the question of whether any part of the United Kingdom is going to be treated differently to any other part of the United Kingdom. And if it isn't going to be treated differently to any other part of the United Kingdom, are we going to stay in the customs union in particular because of the hard border in Ireland? This is a key point. Next, it goes on to say any agreement will have to be based on a balance of rights and obligations and to ensure a level playing field. Preserving the integrity of the single market excludes participation based on a sector-by-sector approach. So there's no possibility of breaking up the integrity, as they describe it, of the single market and Britain choosing to only be parts of it. You're either going to be in it or you're going to be out of it. And at this point, it's looking like we're going to be in it. A non-member of the union that does not live up to the same obligations of a member cannot have the same rights and enjoy the same benefits of a member as a member. So it doesn't matter whether we're out. If we want to have the same benefits of a member, we've got to be like a member. So we're in. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. The four freedoms of the single market are indivisible, and there could be no cherry picking. So that's the same point as earlier. And then it says, notwithstanding paragraph 18 of these negotiating directives, the Union acquis shall apply to and in the United Kingdom as if it were a member state. So once during the transition period, for whatever period that may last, the full body, the acquis is the full body of European law, will apply to and in the United Kingdom as if the United Kingdom were a member state. So for the transition period, we're not transitioning, we're not it's not that we start a transition process on day one, in which things change during the course of the 2-year period and then we're eventually out at the end. For the duration of that 2-year period, every law will apply as it does today. So
yeah, we're in.
We're in.
Yeah.
Right. Now, it mentions paragraph 18. Paragraph 18 says, in relation to the application of the Union acquis to the United Kingdom, the withdrawal agreement should therefore, during the transition period, preserve the full competences of the Union institutions, in particular the full jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the European Union, bodies, offices and agencies in relation to the United Kingdom and the United Kingdom natural or legal persons. In particular, Union institutions, bodies and agencies should conduct all supervision and control proceedings foreseen by Union law. So in other words, even if during the transition period we've decided to opt out of certain EU institutions, during the transition period, however long that might be, those institutions will still have regulatory power over the UK. So let's keep going. During the transition period, the United Kingdom may not become bound by international agreements entered into in its own capacity in the fields of competence of Union law, unless authorised to do so by the Union. So in other words, if the UK during the transition period wants to apply any form of sovereignty at all, it's got to go cap in hand to the European Union and say, please may we enter into this agreement with country X, which is not a member of the European Union. So I think we need to come back to the beginning and say Brexit without the exit.
Brexit without the exit, but we're actually seeing the full force of the European Union here because the European Union simply telling Britain what it can and cannot do. And for the European Union to be able to do that, then obviously we no longer exist as a sovereign nation state, which of course was what people warned about in the very beginning, and the danger of the European Union as a supranational state, not as any form of trade agreement. So the beast is emerging here, Mike. I think this is the key thing. And for all those people who said it was utter nonsense to say that the European Union was a dictatorship with the laws of a police state, we're now actually seeing those laws applied to UK. Brexit is a complete and utter lie. It always was. It was your key point. And now we're actually seeing that the Conservatives are spreading the treason by a bigger and bigger smokescreen around Brexit with no exit. Well, one place that you're not going to find any truth about Brexit is the BBC. Remember, BBC, the survey which the Daily Mail printed showed that 83% of Britons did not trust the BBC. Here's an overview of the BBC's web page earlier today, showing the important things. A lot of depressing information when you actually look on it. They're always very big on talking about child abuse when it's occurred in other countries. So little headline there with a gentleman in orange and the yellowy background. That's to do with a very unpleasant abuse case in America. But on the right of your screen, this is the one that interests me because it said very casually, MPs vote to leave Parliament during refit. And that's the one that caught my eye. And that brings us to this article. What's going on here? Well, let's have a look at it, because apparently, Mike, Parliament is in a terrible state. Nobody...
This is the building, that is.
This is the building,
yeah.
Correct, the building and the facilities. Nobody has yet seen the document which spells out the detail of what is supposed to be wrong with this building. But this is what the BBC had to say, that the Commons has now approved a motion by 236 votes to 220 that they're going to decant from Parliament. So the planned move is 2025 at the earliest, and it's part of a mere £5.6 billion modernisation. So this is a vast sum of money, but as yet we have no detail released to the public as to how that bill is made up. They're saying that Parliament could be the next Grenfell. Now, I find this an insult to the people of Grenfell Tower because, of course, Parliament won't be the next Grenfell, because they are now saying we've got to spend 5.6 billion to make sure our MPs are safe, but they didn't want to spend any money on the residents of Grenfell Tower.
Absolutely.
So here we are. Former Cabinet Minister Damien Green said Parliament was not safe in its current condition, and it was not a wild exaggeration to say that it's like a death trap. So it's interesting when you mix the buildings and the people, isn't it? Because Parliament is certainly not safe at the moment, and the people, I think, are the death trap. SNP Pete Wishart said that estimates for the various options were eye-watering, and he would not be surprised to see the entire project ended costing between 10 billion and 12 billion. Now, my comment on this is what amazing timing that just as we're in the utter confusion of Brexit without the exit, we now see that Parliament has got to physically move out of its buildings. There's even been talk about it moving as far afield as Birmingham, but we'll see. And I wanted to draw people's attention back. This was an article from the UK column in 2008 talking about the EU Reform Treaty, but the image here is clearly labelled that this is Parliament abolished by the EU. Mike, I don't think it's an accident that we've suddenly got to the stage where they're saying, well, we've got to get MPs out of Parliament, because even with the most meticulous planning, this is going to produce utter confusion. We've now got London, which was always designated as a European super state, not a city, but a state. Parliament's now going to be gently eased out of that equation. This is the dismantling of the British Constitution, effectively.
Unfortunately, the party that you would normally associate with trying to reverse that, UKIP, is in increasing disarray. And it's pretty hard to see how the party can actually survive too much longer, Brian, because they're running rapidly out of money if they have any left. But the embarrassments continue because widely reported across the mainstream media today, Henry Bolton, the UKIP leader, has admitted that he lied about having a degree from Sandhurst Military College. He's removed his statement that he had such a degree from his LinkedIn page and has admitted that he was wrong to put that up. I am flabbergasted how anybody that's in the public eye in the way that he is could accidentally make a statement such as this, or could even imagine that they could get away with making a statement that they had a degree when they don't.
Well, Mike, we're now on the subject of UKIP. Let's put the baseline in just at the point where the country needs the strength of UKIP to bring all of those 17 million people together who voted to come out of the EU, 17 million people who I'm sure would be outraged if they really understood the deceit that's being carried on over the Brexit procedure. Should be UKIP driving that forward, but no, what's happened? We've got a new leader come into UKIP, too busy with his 25-year-old floozy. Now he's made a mistake, in inverted commas, over a degree. Is this a mistake, Mike, or is this the man brought in order to try and collapse UKIP at the critical time? And of course, my big point with this man, Henry Bolton, is he's another man who casually said, oh, well, I've worked for the EU for the last X years, but really I think it's a disgraceful organisation, and now I'm going to lead the party actually trying to stop the EU's power in UK. Hypocrisy, duplicity. This man brought in to collapse the party. That's probably my opinion. And of course, who brought him in? Who selected him as the right candidate? That was Nigel Farage. Well, how do we know that things are looking very bad for UKIP at the moment? This man has gone, Gwaine Towler. Gwaine Towler has been with UKIP for about 13 years. He has been what I will call an advisor and sometime PA to some of the senior people. I think this man's heart has been in the right place, and in a conversation I had with him personally at least 10, 11, 12 years ago, when we discussed what was really happening in the country, subversion and treason, he said to me, what you really mean, Brian, is that the revolution always eats its young. What he was getting at here was the fact that we were saying that when UK is collapsed, everybody in it is going to be hurt by the procedure. So I think more than Henry Bolton, Mike, the fact that Gwaine Towler has now backed away says that UKIP is in a very, very serious position. And what a coincidence, just as Brexit is being stalled.
Now, Statistica has today published an article here, or yesterday, sorry, the UK shrinking navy. And what they're saying is the recent commissioning of HMS Queen Elizabeth, Britain's largest ever warship, certainly made waves. Much has been made of the state-of-the-art vessel, which will bring a massive leap in capability to the fleet. However, redundancies have left the Royal Navy with only 29,280 personnel, and the lack of manpower has created a serious dent in its strength and readiness. It recently emerged that a trio of Russian naval vessels transiting the English Channel were intercepted by a British minehunter rather than one of the fleet's frigates due to a shortage of vessels and personnel. The British Ministry of Defence usually publishes details of such events, but on this occasion, HMS Katastok's Russian rendezvous was kept away from the headlines. So they published this useful infographic here showing the number of personnel in the Navy over the years. So 861,000 men in the Navy in 1945, 128,000 in 1955, 86,000 in 1970, 62,000 in 1991, 38,880 in 2000, and 29,280 in 2017. But Brian, the thing that really rose in my mind as I looked at that graphic there was that at the end of the Second World War, there were 861,000 people in the British Navy, and 861,000 people could be organised to do a job They all had a mission-based, idea of what they were there to do. And I look at the current infrastructure of the British government and British government agencies, including the military, and I do not see the capability there to organise,
on that scale.
Even 29,000 people they can't organise to keep the ships afloat. What has, if there's one statistic which shows what has happened to this country in the last 70 years, that is it, in my opinion, because we have lost the skill to organise that number of people and the determination and even the purpose.
Well, Mike, the only thing I would slightly pick up on there is we haven't lost anything. What we are looking at is the whole fabric of the country attacked and undermined. This so-called inability of the British to now do anything, whether it's produce cars or steel or run a proper hospital. This is not true. This is not a change in the average British person. This is as a result of a deliberate political policy to collapse this country. We've seen it across the board. Industries being collapsed, shipbuilding, car production, steel, fishing industry gone. You can follow the policy through. We're seeing it working in the NHS, and now we're actually seeing it in the military. And you're absolutely right. By the time you get down to numbers like 29,000 mentioned there, this is not viable. If you take a smaller nation, if you take Holland, for example, very professional military in the Dutch, but there comes a point where if you only have a few ships, you cannot do anything on your own. You have to work with other nations. And of course, for the Dutch, that would have been through NATO. But now we're seeing the power of EU military unification. And this policy to destroy, to reduce, to cut Britain's armed forces is to ensure that we're fully integrated into that EU military structure. So the cut's utterly deliberate. Let's come back onto the BBC, because I think this is the most offensive article I've really seen from the BBC ever in some ways. Maybe it's just me. These were some of the headlines as they appeared yesterday. Carrie Gracie tells MPs of BBC pay insult. Carrie Gracie says BBC tried to justify unequal pay by claiming whatever, BBC women, their pay gap stories. So here is the BBC. It can't report on the facts around Brexit. It can't talk about the NHS. It can't talk about child abuse. But now we're on to supposed inequality of pay in the BBC. And I'm really going to encourage people to look for this piece of video where this lady is giving evidence to MPs about the BBC's pay structure. So you can find this as a short video clip. And what she's really saying is, how can we BBC journalists report truth when the BBC tells lies over, well, the inequality of pay? I've said our excessive pay. She was really saying if women don't get the same pay inside the BBC and the BBC is lying, how can we tell the truth as journalists? So to put it in context here, at this stage she earns £135,000. And so what she's effectively saying is that she's worth more. She wants to be paid as much as the men. We can have a discussion about this. We're not coming in at the angle from men and women equal pay. I think that's a perfectly reasonable stance. What we're looking at now is the amounts of money that this lady has been paid, £135,000, and she's not happy. And in the small film clip, please do watch it, because if she was to be paid as an actor, she would not be receiving anything. She said, I feel very angry. There was a little snuffle. She's clearly very upset at what they have put some other people through. I really feel sorry for some of these women. They've been underpaid for years, I believe, while trying to raise families and run homes. So this is a BBC woman whose greed is so excessive. Even though she's paid £135,000 a year, she wants more because other people get more. She said the BBC did offer to pay me another £100,000 in back pay, so that's on top of her £135,000 a year after the equality came to light. But the offer sounds like a tacit admission of pay discrimination. So I've just got to encourage people to go and look for this clip. It is so appalling to see her false upset over this, and what's really driving it is greed. Well, let's bring in Tony Hall, because he obviously then had the opportunity to answer for the BBC, and effectively he said, yes, we're working towards equal pay for all. But let's really think about this. The women want to earn as much as the men, but the men in the BBC are receiving even more obscene levels of pay, Mike. And this man sits there earning £450,000, which is, to me, an extraordinary sum of money for any job. But of course, who is paying him? The general public through the licence fee, after Capita has been round to local homes bullying people to pay that licence fee. So for the BBC, I think this is the most obscene article I've ever read. And this is the lady at the centre of it. Go and have a look at her Twitter page. All of this Twitter page at the moment is about equal pay for women. But this is some of the extra stuff that comes up. She says here, 3:30 a.m, heading in for that last stand-in presenter shift on BBC Radio 4 today. Enjoyed it all, though, this week. What other news organisation would let you call it secretive and illegal on equal pay and still let you front flagship show? Despite troubles, BBC is great. This is massive hypocrisy. And let's bring this one in. BBC bosses say my salary from the 29th of January back on News Channel will be £145,000, say equal pay, will be paid more for sitting in warm studio than hurtling around the country of 1.4 billion 24/7. Strange. So she's going to get £145,000, but she's still not happy, Mike. It is obscene, it is disgusting, and people really should be contacting the BBC about this and pointing out that survey that the Daily Mail published, which said that 83% of Britons do not trust the BBC.
It's good value for money, I say, with deep sarcasm.
Right.
Yes.
I'll pause there.
Well, we're going to mention the BBC again in a second. First of all, this is the Daily Star, this from Lebanon. Headline is, UN official says Rohingya crisis has hallmarks of genocide. They say UN Special Envoy on Human Rights in Myanmar said on Thursday that the Myanmar military's violent operations against Rohingya Muslims bear the hallmarks of genocide. Yang Hee Lee told reporters in Seoul, where she's based, that she couldn't make a definitive declaration about genocide until a credible international tribunal or court had weighed the evidence. But we are seeing signs, and it is building up to that. Well, it may well be, but the question in my mind is, and it's not proven, are the Burmese military to blame? And I'm going to bring this on screen again. We showed this a week or two ago because this was from BBC Radio 4. They tweeted this out because they had a journalist in. They had a journalist in Bangladesh at the refugee camps, and what we can see on screen apparently is a child's drawing showing the crisis, and we see some trees in the middle, a house burning on the right-hand side, and what looks like an adult burning above the house on the right-hand side. But on the left-hand side, we have a man carrying a gun, who we assume is the perpetrator. But does that man look like a Burmese military individual? No, it doesn't. Let's just remind ourselves what the Burmese military look like. That's what they look like. They don't have beards, and they tend to be wearing helmets and
full uniform.
Full uniform.
Yeah.
So this is not a Burmese military person on the left-hand side, but Radio 4 tweeted this out, saying just one of the drawings by Rohingya children in Bangladesh. So my question is then, Brian, if this is genocide, and it could quite well be. Who is the perpetrator? Is it the Burmese military, or is it some form of Islamic extremism that has been imported amongst these people, or from even within their own people? It's not clear, but the drawing that the BBC is pushing out seems to suggest that it's not the Burmese military.
Yeah, well, it would be good to see the BBC doing some proper research into it. And I'll just come back to that extraordinary conversation I had with the young lady yesterday who admitted that even BBC journalists were now starting to pick up on this rapid increase in the poppy production in Afghanistan with no explanation. So I don't know, maybe we could get some of the BBC journalists to take a little less pay and do a little bit more reporting of the truth.
Right. Demos has released, well, it's starting a whole series of what they're calling technology briefings. And their first briefing, number 1, is all about online child sexual abuse imagery. They are looking into this in depth. I do recommend people read this, but let's just have a look at some of the points. They ask, is technology a silver bullet? They're saying there have been important technological responses to child sexual abuse images online, but technology can't do everything. There's also a gap between who is able to implement technological solutions and who is responsible for the websites which are abused by CSAI offenders. They say social media is, or they make the statement, social media is primarily to blame, and they're saying reports suggest only a small proportion of CSAI is hosted on social media platforms, in part because many platforms already take steps to tackle it. However, social media can unwittingly offer new material to consumers posted by young people themselves and provides new avenues for online grooming. They are asking, is finding CSAI online difficult? And they're saying it's not all hidden. It can be accessed easily, even stumbled upon. And they're asking, can we arrest our way out of the problem? And they're saying law enforcement, third sector charities and academics agree that the numbers of adults engaging with child sexual abuse imagery online means arresting and prosecuting all offenders would not be possible. This underscores the need for a more wide-ranging response. And they ask, would a ban on encryption be effective? And they're saying that the difficulties caused to law enforcement by blanket uptake of encryption should not be underestimated, but frequently are. However, a ban is not a feasible solution, as it would not deal with the problem targeted and likely to create new ones. So they're saying that there were 7,000 indecent images of children in circulation in the UK in 1990. But that according to sources in the police, the figure has now risen to tens of millions. They say the precise number of individuals convicted of CSAI offences is not published in the UK. This is one of these things that is kind of surprising, Brian, because it's a bit like the number of children that go missing. It's another one of the statistics around children that just don't get published. It gets rolled into another statistic, which in this case is the number of people arrested for obscene publications violations. So if you're specifically transmitting child sexual abuse imagery, you as a statistic are rolled into the general obscene publications violations, and so the scale of the thing is hidden in amongst all this other stuff. They say that the number of individuals increased by 134% to 7,324 in 2014 and 15. In total, 54,000 child sexual abuse offences were recorded in the UK in 2015 and 2016. So I'm not really clear if there's any outcome from this report. I don't think there is. I don't think there are any answers about what to do about this problem. But it seems to me that for as long as people like John Wedger are prevented from doing their jobs, this type of problem is going to persist.
Well, it is, and I'm just going to take a guess, Mike, but I bet that a charity that was not involved with Demos there in compiling that report would have been Common Purpose, because, of course, it was Common Purpose that we, the UK column, was able to expose. The Common Purpose had its own paedophiles buried in its system. There was Matthew Byrne, who was one of the Common Purpose Advisory Board members for Merseyside, and also a very unpleasant young man called James Rennie in Scotland. Common Purpose did not want to hear any of that information, and in fact tried to use their firm of solicitors to silence me when I started to speak about paedophiles and the Common Purpose networks. So I'm pretty confident that Common Purpose wouldn't be working with Demos on that one. Why do I mention that? I mention it because, of course, at one stage, Common Purpose just happened to be sharing the same office facilities as Demos.
Pensions. We can't afford to retire, apparently. Certainly it's getting that way. This is a news release from the Pension Protection Fund. They're there to look after us if, for whatever reason, our pensions aren't in the state we expected them to be when we retire. They're saying that 2 out of 3 pension funds are in the red. This is following on from the Carillion situation, and also comments around Capita and their pension deficit. 3,710 schemes are in deficit. They've been called into action on 2 high-profile occasions of late. They say Toys R Us is one, Carillion, of course, is the other, and they're saying that they are monitoring the health of 5,588 pension pots with some of the biggest names on the FTSE 100 and so on. But the biggest sort of scandal here of all is BT, formerly British Telecom, formerly publicly owned, of course, but privatised by Mrs. Thatcher. The pension deficit is a staggering £9.1 billion. That is amazing. So there you go. If you're an employee of BT, you've got problems, I think. 6.9 billion at Royal Dutch Shell, 6.7 billion at BP, 6.6 billion at Tesco, and 6.6 billion at BAE Systems. It's just staggering. These companies effectively stealing people's money, and there are no repercussions, it seems. Instead, we simply tax all the other pension funds, put the money into the Pension Protection Fund, and hopefully they have enough money to deal with the deficits when it comes to the point.
Yeah, it's only stealing when the little people do something wrong, Mike. It's theft and stealing then. Otherwise, it's a mistake, or it's a deficit, or it's a management problem. Yeah, well, you can't afford to retire. Many people can't afford to do anything because they're on the streets. And I picked up on this very interesting story, which is about Poole near Bournemouth. This is from the local paper, the Daily Echo. Begging will be banned in Poole from tomorrow, despite opposition from groups who have called the move cruel and uncaring. The council has introduced a public space protection order, PSPO, in the town centre, Poole Quay, as well as Poole Park, Sturt and Tatnam. So this is very interesting because, of course, Bournemouth has been doing other quite unpleasant things. They've been putting some sort of cage over seats in parks to stop people being able to sleep there at night. And I've witnessed in the last few weeks, of course, homeless people on the streets of Plymouth. They were being fed by kind local volunteers from small local companies, actually. And in speaking to those people, they said Plymouth claims there aren't any homeless people on the streets, but clearly they are. So this was the headline. And at the end of this article, it quoted this Conservative councillor, Karen Rampton. Just read this very quickly. We want Poole to be a safe and welcoming place for everyone who lives, works or visits our fantastic town. We're responding to those residents and business who tell us that antisocial behaviour is having a detrimental effect on their daily life and livelihood. We take these concerns very seriously and hope that the responsible and proportionate use of the powers given to the police and council officers by the PSPO will give people more reassurance that we can tackle antisocial behaviour on their behalf. Now, I have to admit that when I read this at the end of the article, it does seem that this Conservative councillor is taking an extremely hard line. People who are sleeping on the streets need some form of antisocial behaviour order. But I phoned her up to see whether those comments were correct. And the lady, who was very polite and took time to speak to me, said, well, those were words that I said, but of course they're not totally in context, because there were other things said as well. And one of the things that this lady pointed out is that provision is being made for people who haven't got somewhere to stay at night, but some people are not engaging with that, and some of those people are getting aggressive on the streets with local residents, hence the need for some sort of balance. So I was intrigued that, of course, the paper was playing on local politics, and I'm going to say that that lady councillor seemed to me to be branded as the bad guy, to use that expression, if I may. So I did a little bit more work through the article, and this lady was quoted. She's chair of the local Labour Party, Katie Taylor. She said, these people need help, not punishment. The mere suggestion of fining the homeless still turns these vulnerable people into criminals in the eyes of the public, fostering suspicion rather than sympathy, and shielding the real issues of austerity. In light of the tragic death of the homeless man Kev in Bournemouth recently, Poole Council should think very carefully about these measures. Now, that seemed a perfectly sensible statement. And we had another lady who commented, and this is the Reverend Karen Gorham. She said, I know that many local people and charities highlighted the vulnerability of the increasing number of homelessness in the town in responding to the consultation. This decision makes homeless people even more vulnerable. So what I did was just put this in a very simple form. Let's have a look at these people all together. And what I can see is three people essentially being played off. They are concerned about the people sleeping on the streets, but of course they're now starting to get at each other. The angst is there because of the great lie that there's no money, Mike. So the Labour lady is partly there. She says, well, this is about austerity. And when I spoke to one of the Labour Party members this morning, it was very interesting that they were interested about this subject of the creation of money, where money comes from, and we talked a little bit about the Bradbury pound. But here is real policy in the background, because the other thing that's being reported is that the government is now trying to abolish these local councils and bring them together into a super council. And an independent councillor, Mark Howell, says that this is all about the government trying to collect even more tax. So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that in many, many local issues, good people are being turned against each other based on central government lies about how much money there is. We haven't got time to look after homeless people, but we can create political super councils.
Well, we're going to end with some fantastic news, Brian.
Good.
Because Matt Hancock, and now I've labelled Matt Hancock Digital Minister there. Of course, he has had an upgrade, so he is no longer Digital Minister. He is now Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. I'm not sure who the new Digital Minister is, but anyway, in the spirit of being, for at least some time, Digital Minister, he has now launched his own app, which you can get from the Google Play Store or the iTunes Store, I should say, if you're in the slightest bit interested. So this app is going to feature picture galleries. It's going to have videos of Matt Hancock, if you're into that kind of thing. If you log into this for the first time, you are greeted with the words, "Hi, I'm Matt Hancock and welcome to my app." And he then goes on to say, it's a chance to find out what's going on both in my role as MP for West Suffolk and as Culture Secretary, and most importantly, it's a chance for you to tell me what you think and to engage with others on issues that matter to you. So some people even getting excited that they might find their next girlfriend on the Matt Hancock app, but if you want to get hold of it, you can download the official Matt Hancock app from the App Store or from the Google Play Store. So I can't think of a better way to end the programme today.
These people are not serious, are they, Mike? I mean, they're not real.
No.
Whether he's digital minister or not, these people are living in their own reality and becoming increasingly dangerous. That brings it to the end of today's UK column news. I'm not quite sure what we can really say about Brexit. It is quite clear that Brexit is not Brexit at all. The aim is to have the UK fully locked into this EU superstate, and it's beholden on all of our viewers and listeners to get out there challenging local councillors, MPs, and of course the good old BBC about the real truth. And I'll just end by saying that Carrie's salary of £135,000, I think, would keep the UK column going for about 5.5 years. So we sometimes criticise the BBC for having £3.74 billion to produce its propaganda. But if we could gently, I was going to say remove, I'm not allowed to say that, if we could gently remove Carrie, then probably that would fund the UK column for at least 5.5 years. That's quite a statistic. Thanks for joining us. Now tomorrow
we'll be back. Brian won't be back tomorrow, but I'll be back tomorrow with Vanessa Beeley at 1 p.m. as usual.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.